When I was 8 years old, my family moved away from our busy home in the city to a small, sleepy town in the countryside. My dad had gotten a new job, you see, at the nuclear power plant. The plant loomed over the town, its chimneys coughing out thick smoke onto the houses. Our homes almost seemed like an afterthought, protruding from the side of the plant like a sudden growth when its creators realized too late that their workers would need somewhere to live. We lived on Strand Street, to the east of Building A. Although it was long ago now, I still remember the day we moved very clearly. As soon as we came into view of the towers, the air seemed to feel heavy. It was as if a damp, thick blanket had been pulled up over me, pressing down on my shoulders. When I took a labored breath, my mouth filled with an odd, chemical taste. I rolled up my window. The sun was only just beginning to set. We'd been rushing around all day, trying to cram the last of our things into the car, and yet the town was deserted. I pressed my face against the glass to try and peer into the windows of houses as we drove past, but it didn't seem like anyone was home at all. Each window pane was fully covered from the inside, not allowing even a speck of light to poke through. "I'm sure there'll be lots of other children in our street, Charlie," said my mum, seeming to read my mind. She turned around, squeezing my hand. I tried to smile. "That's our house, right there," chimed Dad, pointing to a small brick house at the end of the terrace. As he tried his best to park on the narrow road, I noticed a couple walking very quickly past us, carrying gray shopping bags. They glanced behind them every now and then, as if they were being followed by something only they could see. They finally stopped at a house just a few doors down from ours, and the woman let out a breath she'd been holding. She then began to point towards us and whisper something to the man, who was already staring worriedly at my parents as they unpacked the car. I hopped out and stood close to my dad, who was enthusiastically shaking the man's hand and introducing us. My dad was the type of person who could quickly become friends with anyone he met, whether they wanted to or not. The man, Mr. Grieg, looked a little uncomfortable and began glancing over his shoulder again. Mrs. Grieg wrung her hands together and began to talk to my parents when she was suddenly interrupted by a knock on their window. Inside, a boy about my age was poking his head through the thick curtains as if he was searching for something. He looked down at me and broke into a wide grin, showing off a missing front tooth. As quickly as he appeared, the window was now empty, and we heard thundering footsteps from inside the house. Mrs. Grieg turned on her heel and almost ran towards the house in an attempt to herd the boy back in. He came flying down the street nevertheless, almost bowling me over. "I'm Toby," he said, barely waiting for me to introduce myself, before asking about the book in my hand and talking a mile a minute about how he had just started reading that series too, and what was my favorite character, and had I got to the really scary bit. The Grieg stood on looking nervous, and my mum gently shooed Toby and I indoors to go and find my new room. As I followed Toby and listened to his excited chatter echoing around our empty house, I looked back to see the Griegs talking in hushed tones to my parents. The smile had worn off my dad's face, and him and my mum now had the same look of fear I had just seen on Toby's parents. My mum had told me weeks before, when my dad had gotten his job, that the move would take some getting used to. Some things were easier than others. I loved having my own room. There was so much more space to play than in our little flat. Even the new junior school didn't seem so scary now that I would have Toby by my side in September. But some things took a little longer to take in. Toby and I could spend hours happily playing in the road, kicking round an old football or running about being pirates. But each day when the sun began to set, our mothers would appear on the doorstep and hurriedly call us inside. My mum wasn't quite on the same level as Toby's yet. Mrs. Grieg seemed to permanently hover behind her door, just waiting for an alarm to go off in her head so she could call him in. Toby, on the other hand, wasn't fazed at all about the curfew. When he heard his mum call, he would roll his eyes before smiling at me and jumping up from the patch of pavement serving as our ship and jogging off to his house. For me and my mum, however, the routine felt strange. My mum had always been caring to me, of course, but had never seemed half as worried when we lived in the city. I could spend all day in the park across the road reading my book on the swings, only coming in for dinner once it had already gone dark. But now, she would look almost scared as she waited for me to walk the short distance to our house, her frown only easing once I was inside with the door shut. My dad would return home a little while later, walking alongside Mr. Grieg after they finished their workday. Dad slid a bolt on the door when he came in. We'd close all the curtains and then sit and eat our dinner, accompanied by the ever-present humming of the plant. A few weeks later, I was almost used to our strange new routine. Something which did still get to me, however, was the noise. Even though I was used to the bustle of the city with all the traffic and people, there was something different about the noise of the plant. It wasn't even a constant humming. On the days when the acrid smoke was at its thickest, it was a grinding, groaning, booming screech that made the ground shake slightly. I mentioned this to Toby, who held his hand up to his ear and said, "Oh yeah," as if he was hearing it for the first time. "I guess you get used to it after a while. We've been here a year now. Maybe if you're here a year, you won't hear it either," he reassured me. "I don't know how you couldn't hear it. It's everywhere. Even in my house," I lamented. Toby thought for a while, and then spoke again in an uncharacteristically quiet voice. "Well, there is somewhere where you can't hear it. But it's quite far away," he added hurriedly, already seeing the smile on my face. So far, I hadn't ventured further than a couple streets away. I felt cooped up and just wanted to explore. "It's still very bright though, isn't it?" I asked him, looking up at the sky. Toby looked at his dinosaur watch, up to the sky and to my hopeful face in quick succession. "I'm sure we've got time," he decided. "Let's go." Toby led the way, his trainers thudding down the pavement. "Wait a minute," I called, the thick air burning my lungs as I struggled to keep up. Toby whipped around, seeming concerned about both my increasingly red face and the seconds ticking away on his watch. We compromised with a brisk walk, trying to ignore the streetlights flickering on one by one. Eventually the pavement faded into a worn-down path, with grass and dandelions creeping up out of every crack. The air began to feel still and cool. It felt as though the plant was loosening its grip on me. I'd forgotten what it was like to breathe so easily. "There," said Toby, his face flush with pride. We'd come into a clearing, surrounded by trees and covered in a lush blanket of grass. Wildflowers were dotted about, pastel shades of purple, blue and pink amidst the sea of green. The last few rays of sunlight shimmered on a bubbling stream, over which stood a quaint brick bridge. I couldn't believe the starkness of this wonderful place to Strand Street. I'd stepped out of a black and white picture and into dazzling Technicolor. But the best part of all was the quiet. As Toby had promised, all that could be heard in the clearing was the soft running of the stream and the breeze blowing in the trees. "See, I told you, Charlie," he said, his face lit up with excitement. "It's nice here, isn't it?" I could have stayed there forever. We picked flowers, felt the soft grass on our toes, chucked poo sticks over the side of the bridge, and excitedly watched them sail down the stream. I felt a lightness in my chest and a sense of freedom I'd not felt since we left the city. We climbed trees, looked for fish in the brook, and watched the sun disappear down past the horizon. The sunset, the time, the rules. It had suddenly gotten very, very dark. Although the rules had become part of our DNA, it was difficult to grapple with the new and pestering longing to stay in the clearing for even 5 minutes more. "Our parents will be cross," said Toby, still looking wistfully towards the bridge. Then with a reluctant sigh, he turned back towards me. "We'll come another day." I dropped my flowers and began ambling after Toby, back towards the gray. But as we headed back, things seemed different to how they had been before. In the dark, the tree branches reached out over us like bony fingers, blotting out the last of the light. The plant's groaning started up again, snatching away the last comforting sounds of the clearing. Then there was a new sound, a rustling behind us, following us. Toby didn't say anything, but he took my little hand into his and we walked just a half a step faster. The rustling came again, this time closer. "Let's run," Toby whispered, his voice tight with fear. As we sped up, the rustling did too. It was louder, more frantic, like a creature on the hunt. Right as the street lamps came into view, we heard it, a loud, screeching, painful sound. The thing made a screaming howl, deep and primal, that almost knocked us off our feet. This was followed by several sharp, unnatural clicks. Whatever it was big. I didn't realize I had tripped until I smacked down hard on the pavement, scraping my knees raw and narrowly avoiding taking Toby down with me. He was too panicked to speak, desperately pulling me up. It wasn't working. I was stuck in something black. It was like a thick puddle of tar, but it was moving, gliding towards us at an unnatural speed. The noises came from somewhere deep within it, shooting out of a gaping hole in its core. Two spindly arms began to reach from the creature. The clicks and grunts were in my ear now, and the ooze was burning my feet as I tried to wiggle them free. It had just reached my knees when Toby finally gave a strong heave, and then we were back on our feet. We ran and ran and ran. Things became a blur. I remember nearly falling over the threshold in my desperate attempt to get inside. My parents slammed the door behind us, locking and bolting it and being shoved to the ground by the thing throwing itself against the door. It wasn't finished with us yet. Toby's mum ushered us away as my parents pushed back against it. I had been in such a rush to get inside, to get away from that thing, that I hadn't noticed what it had done to my legs. The skin on my shins had melted, sloughing off to reveal red-hot, angry patches of flesh that had soaked my shoes in blood. Toby looked down at them and started to cry. He hadn't let go of my hand. We did separate finally when Mrs. Grieg began to clean the wounds, and Toby came over all faint and needed to lay down. Mrs. Grieg picked fibers out of my raw flesh, where my socks had melted into my skin. I tried my best to look away, but then my focus would drift to the insistent banging on the door, and I wasn't sure which was worse. I turned my attention to Mrs. Grieg instead, who was now dressing my legs with all the care and precision of a surgeon. It was as if she had done this before, like she was prepared for this. Once the banging had stopped, and the thing seemed to have retreated, Mrs. Grieg needed to treat another casualty, my mum. She'd been leaning against the door when the same acid that got my legs had suddenly burst through the letterbox, leaving a big, searing rectangle on her shoulder. Later, Mrs. Grieg pulled Toby aside and told him that his dad was missing. She explained that when he and my dad came home and found our terrified mothers unable to find us, Mr. Grieg went out to search. He hadn't come back. Things were strange afterwards. My dad still smiled at me, but it never quite reached his eyes. He went to work and came home, bolting the door which had stayed shut since he left that morning. We saw the Griegs sometimes, though they mostly stayed indoors now too. I'd sometimes catch a glimpse of a tired-looking Toby rushing by, super glued to his mum's side. He wasn't the same boy I'd known before. He'd come over sometimes, following Mrs. Grieg as she helped my mum and I with our healing burns, putting on a special cream that made them sting. Toby and I could never quite look at one another, though. I knew he was feeling the same guilt I was, and it had made us wary of one another, as if we knew that at any moment either of us could make a decision again that put us right back in that situation. Nobody looked for Mr. Grieg. Life went on. People on the street went to work. The plant kept on chugging. Mum bought me long school trousers to wear. I tried not to itch my healing legs. I tried not to think about the clearing and how much I wanted to go there again. I felt guilty when I did want to. Toby and I moved through school, going through the motions. We eventually grew close again, but never talked about what had happened that night. We walked home from school together, chatting away happily as if we were children again, laughing without a care in the world. One day, though, I wasn't thinking, and halfway through a story about a silly thing my dad had done years ago, I looked up to see Toby's downcast face. "Sorry, Toby," I said, patting his arm. "I miss him," he sighed. "I wish we could at least talk about him, but it's..." He trailed off, nodding his head towards his door where we knew his mum was waiting. "He's still with you," I said. Toby gave a small smile before stepping inside. Over the years, things took their toll on my parents. They would wait until they thought I was asleep to argue, sometimes shouting into the early hours of the morning. I would tuck myself tight into my duvet, holding my teddy over one ear and my hand against the other to try and block out the sound, even when I had become much too old for that. Sometimes I would hear my mum shouting. On bad nights, she would drag up that night about our burns and whatever had happened to Mr. Grieg. My dad didn't usually have anything to say at all. It was a bad night tonight. It had been 8 years since the day we were followed home. My legs had calmed from an angry red to a scarred pink. They still ached, though, as I tiptoed out onto the landing to try and hear what my mum was shouting about. "It's not worth it, Nick. It's not worth it," she screamed. They worried less about me hearing them as I got older. Maybe I should be used to it. I still held my teddy close to my chest and tried hard to hold back the tears, feeling childish. I jumped suddenly as I heard the bolt of the door slide open, and then a hard slam. I crept down the stairs, seeing my dad alone in the hallway. "Dad?" I called out. I think because the changes had been over so many years, I didn't take much notice of them. My dad had never been the biggest man, but looking at him now, I could see how much smaller he had become. He was thin and hunched over slightly, probably from the years of labor at the plant. He'd lost his hair and spent more time coughing than talking these days. He'd lost his smile long ago. He'd lost himself then too. "She's gone," he whispered, staring past the open doorway. It took me a couple seconds to realize what that meant. My mum had gone outside, at night, in the dark, where that thing would be. If my dad felt anything, it didn't show. He stood in the hall, his bony hands twitching. He didn't say anything either when I pulled on my coat and slipped past him, out the door, and into the dark. It was already ink black outside. The street lamps flickered like a flame about to extinguish. I heard a slam to my left and felt my legs buckle. "Charlie?" Toby's voice shot out. He shut his door, not bothering to be quiet. Like my dad, Mrs. Grieg seemed to have given up long ago. "Toby, it's my mum. I saw her, she went down there," Toby said, gesturing towards a winding alleyway that cut through the back of the terrace row. "Come on," he said, putting on a brave face. "I'll come with you." We walked side by side down the alley, straining to listen for any sign of my mum and hearing only the plant's screeching groans. The earth shook beneath us, making pebbles bounce against the pavement. I breathed in the sickly chemical smell, and my heart began to pound. We checked behind us every now and then, but our parents never followed. We heard a sudden, splitting scream from what sounded like the next street over. My heart skipped a beat and Toby reached out, gripping my hand. We continued down the alley and I began to hear a noise that had been echoing in my nightmares for the past 8 years. Click, 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 click. Toby's grip tightened. "It's okay," I lied, not sure who I was trying to reassure. I took a tentative step forward. I felt like I was teetering along the edge of a bear pit. The clicking sounded again, this time closer. The alleyway began to close in on us. We were going head to head with the creature again, and this time we had backed ourselves into a corner. The creature was well aware of this, taking its time to make a grand entrance. Tar began to seep along the ground, hissing and bubbling. My legs began to burn just looking at it, and as I lifted my feet to run, gallons of the stuff began to surround us. I watched it dissolve a stone in its path, and a cold dread gripped my insides as I prayed we would go quickly too, once it reached us. Then its arms appeared, reaching slowly from the bubbling tar, and without warning, a face shot forward. It was so much worse than I remembered. A hideous screech tore from its throat, spraying tar which landed just a hair away from Toby's head. It rose above us, a body appearing and contorting violently before slamming down again. It crawled on its front towards us, its mangled fingers digging into the concrete. The tar slipped away for a split second and I saw a hand that could almost be human. It was all sinew and muscle, as if the black tar was its flesh. It twisted again violently, letting out another agonized howl as tar began to surround us. Just as it twisted, more tar slipped away. A human's back appeared. The plant was screeching louder than ever. The earth shook and a deep rumbling came from inside. Heat began to radiate off of the creature, and I gagged as smoke began to fill my lungs. Toby looked over at me with a look on his face I had never seen before. Determined. Resolute. He looked over at the archway behind the creature, which had widened as the tar ate up each brick it touched. He looked back at me with a faint, sad smile. "You'll be okay, Charlie," he said softly. And then he let go of my hand. I screamed when I saw him run, bouncing off the wall and landing in a puddle of tar, which sizzled against his shoes. He was out of the alleyway in seconds, leaving me alone with the creature. It looked at me, the face featureless besides a twisted open mouth. It let out a final, blood-curdling howl before spinning around, following Toby out of the alley and into the dark. The tar came unstuck from the ground and was swept behind the creature, taking a layer of concrete with it. Everything became blurry and I finally let the tears fall from my eyes. I tried to listen for any sounds of Toby, any sign that he was out there. But all that echoed through the night was the rumblings of the plant as it slowed back down into its regular rhythm. I've always found it difficult to keep up with Toby. He moves a mile a minute, and so do his thoughts. I wondered for a second how he could have known that his gamble would work, that the creature would choose him instead. He must have seen what I saw too, when the creature's back was exposed. A large letterbox-shaped scar on the shoulder,